let's build something. So what are we going to be building? Today, we're going to be building a URL shortener. So nothing too fancy, but it is going to cover off a lot of our bases in terms of like create, read, update, delete, all that sort of stuff. And then later on in some future videos, so make sure you subscribe for that. We're going to be touching on some authentication, and then we're also going to be touching on some reporting and graphing and all that sort of stuff. I want to show you what I'm going to be sort of using for the architecture. So it's called Clean Architecture. I've seen this, I think it's by a guy called Jason Taylor. So it's on his GitHub here, as you can see. So this is essentially what we're going to be basing it off. I'm not going to be doing it exactly like that. Okay, so we're in Visual Studio. So what are these things? So API is anything to do with HTTP. So let's say, for example, the CORS policy, any filters that we have set up in our API, etc. Application is going to be like the main business logic and stuff like that, or the main application logic. And the key thing about application is, let's say, for example, like the application needs to interact with a database. The application layer doesn't care about the implementation of anything outside of itself. So when it's dealing with something in the outside world, it creates an interface in here, and then it's implemented inside of infrastructure. So for example, application might create an iDatabase interface, and then that iDatabase interface is implemented in infrastructure. So we have domains. This is where we're going to have our sort of core business logic. So this is mainly going to be models. I don't think we're really going to be using this all too much, just because at the moment with the URL shortener, we're just going to be dealing with key value pairs for the time being. So, and then infrastructure, like I said before, this is anything dealing with like the outside of the application. So has sort of external dependencies. One other thing that I wanted to mention as well is what we're going to be trying out in this actual project is something called CQRS, Command Query Responsibility Segregation. Let's start getting into it. Let's start coding. Okay, so I finally built like the sort of skeleton of what our backend's going to look like. So let me show you how it works. And let's just send a request and see what we get back. Okay, so that's what we're sending. We're just sending a random URL. Obviously, there's no validation at this point yet. But yeah, we get back our data. So this is going to be our key, our status code 200, blah, 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 and an error message if anything comes back. So if we go into our API, we'll have our controllers. And you see that we have this mediator object. So this mediator object is what's using, it's what's used for the CQRS pattern. So mediator will actually send that command, and there's going to be a matching command handler for that specific command. So if we go into our application, you'll see that we have commands here. Shorten URL command. So this is essentially our request body. And then as you can see, we have a command handler. So this thing handles a shorten URL command and is also going to be returning a CQRS response as per the request. And all it has to do is implement this method, this handle method here. What we're doing is we're generating a random 6-character string, checking if it exists in the database. And if it does, or if it doesn't, sorry, then we're good. We're going to just save it to the database and return success and return the key that we've just created. Oh, one other thing I did want to show you guys is what I'm using for a database solution. So since I thought, oh, we're just doing key value pairs, this will be a good opportunity to actually try out Redis. And that's what I've done. If we go back to our clean architecture, you'll see that I have an interface here, iRepository, and it has these specific methods in it. And our actual command is using an iRepository interface. It's not using the actual implementation. So this doesn't care if it's a Redis database or an SQL database or whatever. So if I look at our infrastructure, you can see that I have a repository. It implements iRepository. So this is our actual implementation, and it's using Redis. So the library that I'm actually using is stackexchange.redis, and it's really simple too. All you got to do is you take this as a parameter, you say get me the database, and then you've just got string set and string get It's nothing really too crazy, so it seems to work really well. Since we got the basics done of our application or of our backend, I'm pretty happy with how far we've gotten at the moment. We've still got a lot to do, but unfortunately I don't have time at the moment. I got to get ready for work, unfortunately. So I might jump on a little bit later tonight and we can finish this off. But anyway, see you guys then. Okay, so I'm back, finished work. So we've got a couple things that I think we could get done tonight. One is going to be the actual redirection, so that's going to be pretty nice and simple. And then next is going to be our validation. So we're going to have to validate to make sure that our URL that we receive is actually a valid URL and it's not just gibberish like we were passing it before. So let's jump into Visual Studio. Let's get it done. Okay, so I finished the redirection, and before I actually move on to the validation, I want to show you how the redirection works. So this is my URL, just got a Google Fonts. If I hit shorten, it'll give us back this. So this is our key. So if we punch this into Google, there we go. It redirects us to Google Fonts as expected. So before I actually get into the validation, I wanted to actually explain how I'm going to be doing it. It's using something called MediatR behaviours. So I'll put a link to the documentation in the description if you guys want to have a read of it. But essentially, a MediatR behavior acts like a pipeline. So if we were to look at essentially what a pipeline is, so this isn't MediatR, this is a .NET Core middleware, but essentially it's the exact same concept. And essentially what it does is it gives you a delegate to say next. So go to the next behavior, hit next again, or go to the next behavior. And what this allows you to do is allows you to do pre and post logic. It can be pretty powerful, and that's how I'm actually going to be performing my validation. So I forgot to hit record on my computer, so I don't have any of that time-lapse footage of me actually coding. I don't have my screen recording. So instead of you watching the time-lapse, I will show you, I'll walk you through it. So we have this URL. URL should be invalid. So you can go there. Yep, boom, URL is invalid. If I make it null, a URL is required. Yep, great. So if I do http / google.com, it gives us a valid URL. That's good. That redirects us to google.com. Cool, that's what we expected. Okay, so now that we know the validation works, let me actually walk you through what I actually did to make it work like that. What I did was I created an interface, an iValidator interface. And if we look at our command, so a shorten URL command, we can now see that we have a validator. So this shorten URL command validator implements that interface, and we have the validate method. So essentially all this is going to do is just make sure that the URL is actually given, and then confirm that it's a valid HTTP URL. And then it's just going to return success. Otherwise it's going to say the URL is invalid, etc. So before I was talking about the pipelines and the MediatR behaviors. This is where this comes into play. So I have a validation behavior here. This validation behavior is going to be a pipeline. We have our precondition, our next, and in this case, we don't have any post-condition logic. All it's really going to do is going to grab the validator, it's going to run the validation, and if the validation wasn't successful, it's then going to just return a bad request. Otherwise, if the validation is successful, or the request doesn't have a validator assigned to it, it's just going to go to the next behavior. So what's next? There's only a couple more things that I have to do. I'm going to be creating 2 more behaviors, a request logging behavior, which is going to log the performance of the requests and what actually requests were received. And then also an exception handling behavior. So if any unhandled exceptions occur during queries or commands, it'll be caught in this, and then it'll be wrapped in a sorry, something went wrong server error message. But other than that, that's pretty much it. that's it. We're done. We've finished our back end. No more code to do. That only took a couple of hours. That wasn't too bad. So if you guys actually want to view the code, all the code will be available on GitHub. I'll put the link in the description below. If you guys like the video, be sure to leave a comment, leave a like and subscribe. And in the next video, we're actually going to be building the front end to this. So stay tuned. Catch you guys later. See ya.